I think we're getting ready to get started here. Again, my name is Grace Francisco. I'm head of developer advocacy at Atlassian. I've got the honor of introducing our next speaker. Our next speaker is Chris Mattern, formerly a Venmo, now co-founder of Button, an acquisition and retention platform for the mobile-first economy. Chris is an entrepreneur and engineer from the UK who has spent his career focused on building mobile experiences.
Hey, welcome. To those of you who are here for the last one as well, thank you for sticking around on the British stage. I've actually never followed another British speaker before. That's kind of weird. Hi. My name's Chris, as was introduced. Right now I'm working on something called Button. We're a tiny baby little startup. Probably haven't heard of us. Hopefully you will over the next kind of 6 months to a year. But over the last 5 years, I've had the privilege of working at a number of companies that are what I would like to call working with small, large numbers of users. By which I mean not kind of the hundreds of millions of users that people like Twitter and Facebook have, but rather large enough numbers of users that you need to start to think just a little bit differently about how you build products and how you cope with customer feedback and iterating that back into the process of building software. So yeah, I'm just going to talk a little bit about how I decided what to talk here. So I was very humbled to be asked to speak at an event that was organized by someone who's done so much for both the profession and the art of software engineering as Atlassian has. Typically when I talk, it's more in ones and zeros, less high level kind of the problems that we solve in our industry. So it's pretty exciting for me. And so, excuse me. So what I'd like to talk about today is platform and client. And when you think about scaling a business, you necessarily think a lot about scaling platform. And you think a lot less about scaling client, about scaling product, and about scaling your organization and how you build product and do engineering. So here we have product and we have client, and most people break up their organizations in a way around these two things. So they do it in one of two ways. Either they break it up where they have a group of people who work on platform problems, so people who build the APIs that support your product, store the data, those kind of things. And then they have a group of people who build client experiences. Typically your product engineers, they build your mobile apps, your websites, like whatever else it is that you're doing. So typically either you'll structure it a little bit like this or a little bit like this, where you have small groups of people tightly associated that work on single features across multiple platforms. Whichever way you actually organize the teams, you still seem to see the same thing. You only think about scaling and how scale affects the platform side of the business. And so then the cloud came along, and we have all of these nice buzzwords. So sorry, I'm actually going to get off platform pretty soon. I promise this isn't just a buzzword session. The cloud came along, and all of a sudden, scaling platform is like pretty much the only thing we talk about. It's the coolest, hippest, like newest tech thing in the industry right now. And we have all these cool things that we talk about all the time, like sharding and load balancing and distributed computing and all of these really, really clever, really technical things that solve real problems for platform engineering. So here we have the reason why. When you scale your platform, every day more and more people are using that same platform. The requirements of the same application are now greater. Whereas, so if you don't scale, you get things like these. Probably more 500 error codes than 404s, and that leaves you with these. Unhappy people and no money or revenue or whatever you do. Whereas on client, you actually don't see the same pattern. And so in kind of the habit of putting out fires that we see rather than preemptively trying to do things well, here this graph's going up and to the right, and so we spend a lot of time thinking about how that changes things. Here, for an individual client, an individual application, it has the same constraints, it has the same number of users, it's doing roughly the same things. There's just a lot more instances of it doing those things. So to reinforce this, I'm going to tell a story from my time at Venmo. I was actually at Venmo when I planned this talk, so I hope they don't mind me taking their story and using it here. And it focuses around how hard it is to make changes to products that have very large numbers of very engaged users, or at least how noisy it is. So we were very, very fortunate to have a user base who was so engaged. Like when you think about having 1,000 users, if you change something and you get an email from one, you're probably going to be pretty happy because people care about what you do enough to email you. And that's actually 0.1% of your entire user base who would have emailed you if you get an email from one user. And then when you think about scaling that up a lot, you start to get a lot of emails. And so here's a change that I made in my first 3 or 4 months at Venmo. We were very proud of it. This was our kind of first major redesign of Venmo in a while, and it coincided with the release of Apple's iOS 7. Yeah, Holly, you're in it. So here you can see we did a bunch of things. It was pretty much a fundamental rewrite in a number of ways. We removed both the top and bottom banding. The content feels a lot more free. Obviously, it's also compared 4-inch to 3.5-inch here. It feels very much more modern, very much more light. But what we actually also did is made a functional change. So at the bottom, the bar that you can see there that shows the people that you've most recently paid, we removed it. And we removed it because the usage figures told us that not many people were using it. There are also other ways to achieve the same thing, and it looks really, really ugly. It didn't fit in with the new design at all, so we killed it. And so we got thousands of emails. These are the ones I can print on the screen. We got emails to us personally. We got emails to the company. People were really, really upset. So we've got things like, I really like my favorites at the bottom. Now it seems I have to search for the people I pay every day. Am I missing something? Just requests for the feature to change. So please bring back the recent recipient bar at the bottom of the screen. Most of my payments are the same 5 people. So obviously receiving emails like this makes you sad. I had one personally to me that said, why are you effing up Venmo? Which was not very fun for me. And so we had to do something about this because when thousands of users are unhappy, right, there's got to be something behind that. So we sent it off to the design team, and we just said, hey, fix this problem. People are emailing us, just like make the problem go away. So they came back with this, which doesn't solve the original problem of, that thing's horrible and ugly, and it's very reactive. Like someone said, bring back the recents bar, and so we brought back the recents bar. So we pretty much just sent them away and said, okay, no, do it again, because this is a really bad idea. And so, okay, I'll go with the slide order. It's all good. So the question that we started to ask ourselves was it reasonable to have a complaint? Like, did we break or diminish a sensible user flow? And so in this case, rationalizing it, it does seem reasonable that a user would want to pay the people that they pay most often more quickly than people that they don't pay very often. That seems like a perfectly useful and perfectly reasonable thing to want to do. So with that in mind, we decided to go and take a bunch of different ways that you could possibly do this. And so here we have 3 of the things that we looked at. So excellent ears play. So here's one that we played with. It's a little exploding menu from the bottom right that comes up vertically. In this one, at the top of the feed, we introduce your most recently paid friends. And then here we have this little kind of side scrolly out bar. And so we figured we had to find some way to figure out what the right thing to do. So out of curiosity, if you don't mind, who here prefers A, or the furthest left, by show of hands? Okay, like 10 to 15% of people. B? Okay, wow, definitive, I like it. And C? You're really messing up my talk here, guys. Interesting. Okay, so never been quite that close before, but I think it's still reasonable to say that there are a good number of people here who weren't on board with A. So wait, which one was B again? Because we loved B. Oh yeah, okay, that's pretty cool. Interesting. So I will take solace in later telling you that you're all wrong if you measure user behavior, but we'll get to that later. Cool. So we had this hypothesis, and we needed to find some way of solving the hypothesis. So the hypothesis is that the user wants a way to pay their most recently or most frequently, or some function of the two, friends more easily than people who they haven't. And so we decided, and we actually wrote this on the wall after this session, to say, create a hypothesis with a root cause rather than reverting for a feature request. And so we made these 3 different versions, and we did some user testing, and we had no real statistically relevant result, because it's really hard to get statistical relevance with very small numbers of people. And as we didn't show here, but we typically show with audiences, I promise, you get a fairly even distribution between the 3. And then the other set of voices that you get as you scale, to the point of scaling the product organization and the engineering team as you scale your user base, is you actually have a bunch of engineers, a bunch of product people, a bunch of designers who all have opinions on these things too. So like a lot of you put your arm up pretty fervently for B. A designer who's been involved in this process who really likes B puts his arm up really fervently. And if he doesn't get B into the product, he feels like he's not being listened to, or that you don't care about his opinion. And so this for us was kind of a turning moment where we decided that we couldn't guess anymore. We couldn't just have an inferred opinion and then like put it in production and then say, okay, well, it's doing like X, but is X good? Like, is a 4% increase in engagement good? Like, what could we have gone? And so to the end of having every engineer, every designer, and every product person be able to feel like this was their product, we decided to go about building a framework to put things into production in front of a small number of users to validate ideas and designs. So we actually then created 30 or 40 different versions of this. And we had designers work with almost everyone in the company to build these, show them to very, very small amounts of the population. And it turns out that actually we were nowhere near. This is the design that we ended up going with, and you can see in Venmo now. And this performed over 60% better than B, which was the one that people here liked, when compared on the key metrics of likelihood to use mashed up with how much you pay people in general. So we found something that, for us, statistically, was really good. And so then we started thinking, okay, well, how do we make this even better? How do we start testing everything? And things that we think of and things that we don't think of. And so we had a hack week, and you know how things get a bit crazy at hack weeks. And we built the second version of this framework that I don't have a screenshot of because I was asked not to show it. And essentially the idea is, how do you take any problem we solve, apply a set of rules to it to build a set of possible versions of it, test them all, and then we actually pull request the answer that was best. So in the case of a button, for example, there might be 5 different colors that we use in our brand color set. And there might be 2 fonts and 2 font sizes. And there might be 2 different places you could put that button. So we try them all, see which one performs best by the things that we think would affect like that particular feature. As soon as one reaches statistical relevance, it then gets pull requested into the main repository. And in the next release, that will be live for all of our users. So we're pretty excited about that. Not just because obviously it's like really freaking cool, but also because it means that anyone who comes to me or comes to a designer or comes to an engineer and says, I think this would be really cool, we've created a way to not say no, but rather prove it. And so with a very small amount of effort, we can get something in front of a small number of users. Obviously, quality, there's a consideration, so we spend a lot of time around that. And then if they come back and say, oh, well, my feature's not in production, I can say, well, because it sucked. Because users didn't behave the way we wanted them to after they saw it. So yeah, I think, let me just get that. So quality, when you get to this, is really, really important, because at this point we have thousands of different potential coincidences of different code branches. Because every potential change in every feature represents a new section of code that's only being executed on a small number of devices. And the safety that we get with quality is that the same thing's being executed on every device. So we take away kind of the promise that we have in mobile for quality. So as we grew, our investment in testing changed from around 10% overhead in our team to around 30%. So around 30% of everyone's time was spent either on testing tooling, improving our approach to testing, actually just improving the coverage, and then building tools to be able to make it compatible with things like this. As the product grows, as the user base grows, the team grows. And hiring engineers is hard, but keeping them really happy is really, really difficult. And so data can empower everyone, not just engineers. We now have, at one point, we actually had our office manager contribute a feature that was then A/B tested, performed well. And so essentially, she contributed a feature which later went to production. Back to the original example, essentially, don't turn feedback into product requests. We made that mistake for a really, really, really long time. And I've never had a happier day than when we realized that what we should be doing is trying to evaluate whether there's a problem with like some piece of user behavior that was unearthed by user feedback. User feedback unearths problems. It doesn't document them. And then the last thing I'd like to talk about, which kind of comes into both of the things that we've been talking about, is as you grow and as you try to empower a large group of people to be collaborators on a product, how do you choose what to work on? Because ultimately, like, power is the choice, right? Power is I say what happens, and then other people go and build it. And then how do you distribute that power? So everyone says what gets built. And then how do you do that in a way where you actually are still building towards the right things? Because obviously, as a company, you have goals. You have things that your company fails if you don't manage to succeed at. And people don't always necessarily have those front of mind. And so the way that we approach this is essentially creating a very, very, very strongly defined 3 to 5 set of company goals, and then another 3 to 5 on a product level. So any person who's considering a feature to be evaluated for any of the products has maybe 6 to 10 different things that they should evaluate it against. And then that evaluation process gets distributed across the company. So I have an idea. I want to add a button that orders beer to the nav bar. I saw so many heads come up when I said beer. That was amazing. I want to add a button that orders beer to Venmo, which actually was genuinely suggested by one of our co-founders at one point and went through this process. This process saved us. Is this important to the company? Does this help us get towards any of our goals? And the answer, of course, is no, because it's silly. And so you need to create some kind of a framework if you're going to have genuine collaboration on the top of the funnel of the product roadmap, and some kind of process that filters them for sensibleness. And we used an RFC process for that. So we had a very technical RFC document template that we would send out. And I think, honestly, there's a lot of better things you could do there, where you actually get comments, and everyone can kind of have their voice on everyone else's feature ideas. So I think that's me. I think I'm about 2 minutes under. So I don't know if there's any questions.
Thank you, Chris. Make sure to post your questions on the Confluence questions site using that bit.ly link that you see there on the left and the right on the signage right there. I think we might have time for one question. Do you want to switch to one question? All right, so outside of usage data, do you have any suggestions for gathering feedback from users other than traditional methods as their Atlassian solution?
Outside of usage data. So the tool that we use the most and the most successfully is user testing. So obviously it's not a totally isolated test where they're in the wild, but getting people into controlled groups, and you have to do it on scale. You have to be dedicated to it, and you have to be dedicated to the science of it. It's very, very easy to run a user test that means absolutely nothing. Because if you ask them leading questions, they give you lead answers. You need to create an isolated study with a statistically relevant number of people. And so what we would do is we would actually book user testing sessions before we knew what we would user test. So every Wednesday and Friday, we had a standing appointment where we'd have 4 to 6 people come in for user testing sessions, and we would decide what we would show to them based on the problems we were currently trying to solve. And very often, we would actually try and build into those user testing sessions. So if we're wondering about feature X or approach A, B, or C, we'd actually spend engineering time building a very, very simple interactive mock, put it in front of them, and then get 20, 30, 40 people to try things out before it ever actually saw a production quality build. I can't answer the Atlassian part. I don't know if that's something that you guys do.